Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. Charles Valo was murdered on July 11, 2019. Just 2 days later, on the 13th, Chad sent Laurie the following message. He wrote, "I'm heading to bed so that I can come snuggle tightly against you. I adore you. You are truly my best friend on earth and throughout eternity. See you in a minute." And I think it's important, and it was sent at 8 minutes past 10 at night, as I say, 2 days after Charles was murdered. Although that's in a way obvious, it's also important to note that at the time, Chad was married to Tammy, and obviously this was written prior to Tammy's death. The very next day, and this is according to a report published in the East Idaho News, Chad began to write Laurie a story that was sent in many text messages throughout the day. So it seems as though that sort of narrative kicked off around this very romantic event of Laurie's brother basically shooting her husband. The story seemed to be a romance novel about Chad and Laurie, but the names were changed to James and Alina. So this is the mirror image of some people become demons and zombies and become disposable, while others become sort of godlike figures and figures of romantic powerhouses. In future text messages, Chad and Laurie would refer to each other with outside of this narrative, also as James and Alina, and sometimes also as Raphael and Lily. Now, according to the article in East Idaho News, the following is the story that was observed in email and text messages. The text is just as it appeared in the messages and has not been corrected for grammatical errors. And so it starts off, Friday morning, October 26, driving south on the freeway, a voice said, "You will meet an extraordinary woman today who will change your life forever." This was shocking, since such a thing seemed very unlikely at this conference. And then the story goes on to document the movements of a writer who gives presentations and a woman in the audience who kind of becomes interested in this writer. And obviously it's a parallel to his own story, to Chad's story and to Laurie's story and her involvement later on in that story. Now, I've always felt one of the lingering mysteries in the Valo case has been how a vixen like Laurie ended up with a very un-Chad like Chad. If you think about Chads and Stacys, Chad's not really much of a Chad, is he? But even Chad, through his many messages and writings, he seems to acknowledge he's something of a chump. Not necessarily foolish, but relatively simple-minded, a relatively simple fellow. He seems to understand that in the context of the goddess that he finds himself with, and perhaps finds himself not necessarily worthy of her attention. But yes, foolish as well. The spiritually flattering idea that Laurie was a goddess, not like just as a compliment, but literally, and the idea that the two had been partnered together in previous lives, I think gives some idea of the magic carpet ride that Laurie was on. But it still didn't really resonate. It seems fanciful and unrealistic. Well, now I think we can see that Chad basically wrote a romance novel featuring Laurie as Alina and himself as James. And clearly this is what activated not only Laurie's imagination, but triggered some sort of romantic response, even on a cellular level. And I think it's through this sort of thing, this morphed into the canvas where she becomes something else. So I don't think it started with "you were God and I saw you in other lives." I think it started with flattering her within a romantic scenario, and then just turning the volume up of that flattering onto the most extreme level. And I think, first of all, I know writing can do that. I know writing can make some people fall in love with an idea, and sometimes with the creator of those ideas. And so can you see how it really all does make sense that Laurie fell in love not so much with Chad, but with his mind, and even more with his idea of her. Laurie, put otherwise, 49-year-old Laurie fell in love with herself, and an idea of herself. And you can see just how simple and easy a fictional romance novel intended to pull strings and push buttons in the person that's being addressed or targeted, as well as the writer and would-be recipient. I mean, he's also bringing himself along for the ride. Well, just how much of a long walk is it to play fiction can be fun with spiritual themes of doomsday and deliverance, electing yourself within the schema not as a lover, but as a savior? Well, it's not a long walk at all. So I'm going to take this a little bit further, but before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. Like, share, leave a comment. If you're enjoying this episode, please hit the thanks button, and let's continue. So do you see that playing God with writing is actually easy? In fact, one might say that even when one isn't playing God, even when you are just writing, especially fiction, explicitly one is playing God anyway. You conjuring, you're creating, you're inventing, you are in control of a narrative. And these inventions of endless arcs of often self-reinforcing scenarios obviously often have oneself at the center. And that is exactly what Chad and Laurie do. Chad involves Laurie in his story, and he puts both of them at the center of that universe. And I was at the Griffith Observatory not that long ago in California, where you sort of are reminded that at a certain point, people believed that the Earth was the center of the universe. It's a nice thought, but is it true? Is it realistic? It's kind of a default setting for people to think that way. If the thing that got Laurie hooked on Chad was his flattering writing and captivating scenarios, then the thing that I think got Chad's motor racing was altogether more simple. I was a big dumb male, as Steve Martin famously put it in LA Story. According to East Idaho News, this is just dealing with some of the news that came out of the trial. A text from Chad to Laurie on July 13 at 11:06 p.m., quite late at night. Bear in mind, again, Chad is probably at home or possibly at home, and maybe Tammy's in the kitchen, or Tammy's in the bath, or Tammy's in bed next to him, but she's still around. But anyway, he writes, I feel she will be gone by then, and I will still have that hoopla to deal with, because a lot of family is coming and will stay for July 24th. And so he's referring to BYU Idaho's graduation on the 23rd. And so what do you think he means by, I feel she will be gone by then? So it seems almost like he's saying 10 days later, someone is not going to be around. Is that a reference to Tylee, or is that a reference to Tammy? Certainly a reference to someone female. On July 14, the very next day, Chad said to Laurie, good morning, my most beautiful Lily. Thanks for joining me in the shower this morning. Wow. Getting ready to leave for my meetings. Does noon your time look like a time we could talk? I love you so immensely that the whole universe knows it. And very soon, the people on this little blue globe will know it too. Of course, when the cops came a-knocking on November 26, 2019, during a welfare check, Hermosillo asked Chad how he knew Laurie Vallow, and Chad said that he hardly met her, hardly knew her. Not sure how well that would be received in the romance novel. Obviously, now it's clear that that message from Chad to Laurie probably wasn't sent from sort of a home setting. But you can imagine between July and October, so between the deaths of Charles and Tammy, Chad probably did send a number of texts from home when Tammy was around, dealing with his romantic narrative. I'm assuming that. Isn't that likely? So I'm not going to go through the rest of this sort of pretty saccharine self-promoting story, but I will put a link to it in the description. You guys can check it out yourselves. What he also said to Laurie on the 14th was, "I need so badly to just gently kiss you for hours. It would likely lead to other activities." And then Laurie responded, "Likely or luckily?" Chad then responded, "It would luckily lead to nakedness." Well, the word luckily is in all caps. And again, all of this is taking place just 3 days after Charles Vallow was killed, as Angela Kerndall tweeted on May 5th, just yesterday. So on the same day, Chad also texted Laurie, "Hanging in there, but really missing you too. Please find out the name of Mel's campout in Utah. I have no intention of going, but I feel it is our avenue to get together, whether she's still here or not." There are also references to MG in their little fictional narrative. I think that's a reference to Melanie Gibb. So it's kind of weaving a story, a fictional story, inside reality. And again, it's just an interesting analogy to the zombie stuff and the doomsday stuff. So anyway, apparently Hart, the investigator, found no signs of regret or sorrow in any of the text messages following Charles's death. But of course there was regret and there was sorrow. Regret that Charles hadn't left Laurie as a beneficiary in his will. I think Chad felt regret about that as well. And sorrow that she would now have to make do without her dead husband's dosh. I think when you read through this stuff, the Vallow case is outwardly complex and intriguing, and it's a complicated spiritual labyrinth. But actually the people in the story, a simple if striking hairdresser once upon a time, and a bored with his lot gravedigger. And I've actually been to Chad's home in Salem. It's just outside of Rexburg. It's really hard to imagine someone in this really simple environment could imagine himself as this deliverer, let alone someone else seeing someone coming from this environment as this extraordinary figure. But there it is. And so suddenly they found a license to daydream, and daydream big. In their fictionalizing, they found a world of significance and power. But the bleeding heart at the center of all this is weak people, weak in mind and weak in body, making a series of very bad decisions. And these bad decisions are made within a sort of miasma of sort of saccharine, self-reinforcing fiction. It's within this fictional narrative that all of this nonsense makes sense. So without the narrative, nothing could have happened, really. And that involves other people as well. And that is the really scary thing, is the number of people who join them on their crazy magic carpet ride through wishful thinking land. And so I think one's got to sometimes think about our own narratives, our own guiding narrative arcs, the stories that we tie our behavior into. Do they make sense? And what are those stories? Is it about wishful thinking? Is it realistic? How does it key into the rest of our culture? What about our culture's story for itself? Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.
What makes you tick? Being a good mom is very important to me, and a good wife, and a good worker, and being all those things together is not easy. So I'm basically a ticking time bomb.